What if I told you that the wisest man who ever lived opened portals that should never have been opened, that behind King Solomon's glory lay a secret so deep, so dangerous, that not even the centuries dared to completely erase it? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now could completely change the way you view the spiritual world and our time. Solomon is remembered as the man of divine wisdom, the builder of the temple, the king blessed with riches and power. But few speak of the other side of his story, the hidden side, the one mentioned only between the lines in the sacred texts. There are ancient manuscripts outside the traditional canon that claim he received a ring, a spiritual key, given by entities of the unseen. With it, he not only understood the spiritual world, but controlled it. Angels, demons, elemental forces, all obeyed the command of the king who dared to rule the invisible. But the big question is, to what extent did this power come from God? And to what extent was it influenced by something that shouldn't be touched? Have you ever considered that perhaps Solomon himself crossed a forbidden boundary? Today, thousands of years later, scientists speak openly about dimensional portals, particles that behave as if they exist in more than one place at a time, and machines capable of simulating entire realities. Sound familiar? Modern man, with all his technology, seems to repeat the same mistake of the past, trying to dominate the invisible. The difference is that now, instead of a golden ring, we have particle accelerators. Instead of sacred rituals, we have binary codes and quantum simulations. What was once called magic is now called advanced science. But the goal remains the same: to understand and control that which lies beyond our perception. And this is where the danger begins. Because when man believes he can control forces he does not understand, he awakens something he can no longer contain. Have you ever felt there was something beyond what meets the eye, as if the physical world were just a small part of a much greater reality? Solomon believed this, and it was precisely this belief that led him to the brink of wisdom and destruction. He didn't just want to understand the unseen, he wanted to master it, and this seemingly pure desire transformed him into someone who spoke with beings from other planes, entities that instructed and, at the same time, tested him. The same knowledge that elevated him was what destroyed him. Today, we live in an age of artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, and experiments with time and space. We live surrounded by machines that learn, speak, and even think. Humanity believes itself to be at the pinnacle of wisdom. But are we truly enlightened, or merely blinded by the pride of knowledge? Are we, like Solomon, opening portals we don't know how to close? Stay with me, because what follows will make you see the hidden connections between the ancient and the modern, between prophecy and technology, between faith and the future. If you believe the prophets saw the future, and the future is now, sign up, because what follows this introduction will reveal the most forgotten side of Solomon's wisdom, and, perhaps, the mirror of our own destiny. Perhaps the most disturbing thing about this whole story isn't what Solomon did, but what we're doing now, repeating every step he took without realizing it. Deep down, it seems humanity has an ancient obsession, mastering what it doesn't understand. And it's precisely at this point that the line between wisdom and folly begins to blur. When man tries to command the invisible, he doesn't realize that the invisible also observes. And I'd like to hear from you, yes, you who are listening now, what you think about all this. Do you believe we're passing through the same portals Solomon opened thousands of years ago? Or do you think the advancement of science is just another step in the divine plan? Tell me in the comments. I read each one, and it's precisely in these exchanges that the channel comes to life. When you share your opinion, your point of view, you help this message resonate further, and who knows, perhaps touch someone who is also seeking answers. And if this topic resonates with you, if it somehow sparked something deep inside you, a memory, a question, or even that thrill we feel when we realize something bigger is at work around us, then leave a like right now. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it's what shows YouTube that this content is important, that it deserves to be shared with more people who, like you, are trying to understand what's happening in the spiritual and technological worlds. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and continue to bring profound reflections like this. When you subscribe, you're saying, I want to continue being a part of this. I want to walk alongside you in this awakening. And that's what makes this community so special. People who aren't content with shallow answers, who feel there's something beyond what meets the eye. So, if you're not already a member, subscribe now and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. What's to come will show you that Solomon's knowledge may not have been confined to the past. It may be manifesting again, before our very eyes. And the next part of this story will prove it. They say Solomon was the wisest man who ever walked the earth. But few ask where this wisdom really came from. There's a strange silence between the lines of history, a shadowy space where the brilliance of knowledge mingles with something that sounds dangerous. Solomon wasn't just a learned king. He was a man who knew the unseen. And according to ancient records, some of them hidden in apocryphal texts and Kabbalistic writings, he received something that placed him between worlds, the legendary Solomon's ring. This ring, they say, was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Engraved with symbols we would now recognize as codes or sacred geometries, it allowed him to communicate with spiritual entities, some luminous, others less so. It's curious to think that, while the prophets heard the voice of God in dreams or visions, Solomon spoke directly to the messengers of the unseen. But what began as a quest for wisdom ended up becoming a perilous journey. The line between divine revelation and forbidden curiosity became increasingly blurred. There are accounts that describe Solomon invoking beings to aid him in the construction of the Temple of Jerusalem. Spirits who moved stones, manipulated metals, and shaped structures that seemed impossible for the technology of the time. Some scholars argue that the temple was more than a building. It was a portal, a connection point between heaven and earth, between the physical and spiritual worlds. Solomon, with his ring and his words of command, would have become the mediator of this link. But here begins the true mystery. For the same man who built the temple of God also built something no one has ever dared touch again, a place that, according to ancient writings, was sealed, hidden, and never rebuilt, and perhaps for good reason. The king who spoke to the shadows discovered early on that every revelation comes at a price. Divine wisdom is pure, but when man tries to mold it to his own will, what emerges is not light, it is confusion. Solomon believed he could rule the spirits as he ruled his kingdom. He gave orders, traced seals, pronounced secret names. And for a time, everything seemed under control. But spiritual power is not something one masters, it is something one serves with humility. When he tried to transform the sacred into a tool, the very forces that obeyed him began to turn against him. It was as if the universe, silently, demanded the balance he had disrupted. This story isn't just about an ancient king, it's about all of us. How often, driven by the pursuit of power, do we try to control what we don't understand? We call it advancement, progress, technological transformation, but deep down, it's the same impulse, to touch the invisible and use it to shape the world in our image, the same desire that led Solomon to glory, and then to his downfall. There's a hidden truth lurking behind this narrative, and perhaps that's what makes it so unsettling. Knowledge, when separated from its spiritual essence, becomes nothing more than a sophisticated form of pride. Solomon wanted to understand the workings of the universe, to decipher what lay behind the veil of creation. And who can blame him? This thirst for answers lives within us too. But there's a difference between seeking truth and trying to possess it. The former liberates, the latter imprisons. Ancient manuscripts tell that, in his final decades, Solomon began to experience disturbing visions, dreams of voices he could no longer distinguish whether they came from God or from the entities he had summoned. He had opened so many doors that he no longer knew which were under divine protection, and which were not. The man who once reigned over the invisible began to be watched by him. The golden throne became a prison of silence. It's as if the entire universe is teaching him a lesson. There are boundaries that even wisdom shouldn't cross. Curiosity, when driven by vanity, becomes a trap. And it's curious to see how this same pattern repeats itself behind the scenes of modern humanity. Scientific experiments that defy space and time, algorithms that learn on their own, artificial intelligences that already make decisions that not even their creators fully understand. The tools change, but the essence of the search remains the same. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a point at which Solomon's journey ceases to be just an ancient story and becomes a mirror of our present. The same duality that surrounded him, light and shadow, faith and power, wisdom and ambition, still pulses in the human mind. The difference is that now, instead of symbols engraved in gold, we use coded languages, circuits, and electrical impulses. But the purpose, that has never changed. We continue to try to govern the invisible. And before we continue, I want you to leave a word in the comments that represents what you've felt so far. It could be wisdom, mystery, or perhaps limit. I want to know how this part of the story touched you. There's a curious point in Solomon's story that is rarely told in depth: the mystery surrounding the calling seal of Solomon. Many imagine only the symbol known today as the Star of David, but the oldest texts suggest something quite different. The seal would be a combination of geometry, sound, and spiritual intention, a kind of universal language capable of interacting with dimensions unseen by the human eye. Solomon, according to these traditions, not only understood this language, he knew how to use it. And this is where the concept of portals begins to emerge. Imagine, for a moment, that the universe is like a symphony. Everything vibrates, everything emits a frequency. Every atom, every sound, every thought has a unique signature. Now think about Seal of Solomon not just as a drawing, but as a formula. A geometric pattern that, when activated with the right knowledge, could open pathways between different planes of reality. The ring, then, would be the instrument that channeled this energy. Not a magical artifact in the usual sense, but a bridge, a spiritual technology that united the visible and the invisible. It's interesting to see how this idea of vibrations and frequencies has spanned millennia and resurfaced today with new names. We talk about quantum resonance, energy fields, dimensional vibration. Modern scientists study particles that appear and disappear, crossing space-time barriers as if they existed in two worlds simultaneously. The boundary between science and the spiritual is becoming increasingly blurred, and it's impossible not to remember Solomon, the man who seemed to understand this language before any laboratory existed. Perhaps the ring was symbolic, but the power was real. It represented mastery over universal harmony, over that which maintains the balance between worlds. When Solomon used the seal, he was in a sense manipulating the invisible fabric of creation. And what's most striking is that this wisdom hasn't completely disappeared. It's simply been hidden, fragmented among doctrines, alchemies, and ancient mysteries. Some secret orders and esoteric traditions claim to preserve fragments of this wisdom, while others believe it was withheld from humanity until we were ready to use it without destruction. But the question is, are we ready? Or are we once again reaching for something we don't fully understand? When we look at the advancement of modern technology, we see humans recreating ancient symbols in the form of circuits, frequencies, and energy patterns. What was once sacred geometry is now binary code. What were once called dimensional portals now translate to wormholes and folds in space-time. It's as if we are reliving Solomon's knowledge, but without the fear he lost only at the end of his life. And this reflection leads to something even deeper. The seal may have been more than a tool. It may have been a warning, a reminder that spiritual power, when treated as cold science, becomes a weapon. Behind the scenes of human history, each time someone tries to open what is sealed, the price is always the same. The balance is broken. What Solomon believed to be mastery over the invisible may actually have been a disguised surrender. Because when one touches the divine without reverence, return is inevitable. There are records describing the seal emitting its own light, reacting to specific sounds as if responding to a precise frequency. And here's something fascinating. Today, modern physics confirms that sound has the power to alter matter. Sound waves can form perfect geometric designs, identical to ancient symbols. This means that Solomon, in some way, already understood the relationship between sound, form, and energy, something we are only now rediscovering. And perhaps this is the true meaning of the seal, a representation of the harmony that connects all that exists. A bridge between body, mind, and spirit, between the Creator and creation. When man lives in tune with this frequency, he becomes part of the divine order. But when he tries to control it, the order is reversed, and chaos takes over. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are indications that the seal was not just a spiritual tool, but an actual key, capable of opening portals to planes where the laws of time and matter do not operate as we know them. And the most disturbing thing is that, in the modern world, the search for this key seems to have begun again, only this time with machines. Before we move on, leave a comment with a word that sums up what you've felt so far. It could be balance, mystery, or key. I want to see if you've also realized that this story goes far beyond legend. When we look closely at history, we realize that Solomon was not the only one to touch the boundary between the visible and invisible worlds. In fact, almost all ancient civilizations left clues that they understood, or at least sensed, the existence of forces that transcended matter. The Egyptians spoke of the Duat, the invisible realm where the spirit traveled after death, an intermediate space between dimensions. Sumeria, one of the oldest known civilizations, recorded on clay tablets accounts of beings descending from the heavens bringing knowledge and power. And in Babylon, priests built ziggurat-shaped temples, believing that these physical structures were bridges capable of connecting the human to the divine. What is striking is that even separated by thousands of kilometers and centuries of difference, these people spoke essentially of the same thing: portals, places of passage, points of intersection between realities. They believed that under certain conditions, sound, geometry, sacrifice, cosmic alignment, it was possible to open windows to what lies beyond. And when we compare these ancient accounts with modern studies on quantum fields, parallel realities, and hidden dimensions, the coincidence begins to sound like a revelation. It's as if what we call science today is just a new language to describe what the ancients already knew. The Egyptians, for example, believed that sound could shape the universe. They spoke of the creative word, the verb that gave form to matter. Interestingly, current physics confirms that sound can alter atomic patterns and generate perfect geometric shapes, known as cymatics. And the geometry used by Egyptian priests in building the pyramids, angles, proportions, and orientations, follows the same principles of energy and frequency that physicists study today in resonance fields. What was once mysticism is now equation. What was once ritual is now experiment. Sumer, in turn, described the Anunnaki, beings who came from heaven to earth, bearers of such advanced knowledge that they transformed human civilization into something completely new. Regardless of the interpretation, mythological or literal, the central point is the same: there was contact with what is beyond. What Sumer called gods may well represent entities or intelligences from other planes, which today we try to explain with terms like alternate dimensions or parallel universes. And the idea of portals, present in their myths, aligns with the modern concept of wormholes, these folds in the fabric of space-time that theoretically connect different realities. Babylon went further. There, power was architectural. The ziggurats were not just temples, they were dimensional structures. Each floor represented a level between heaven and earth, and the priests climbed their staircases as if traversing the spiritual planes. It was the human attempt to scale the invisible. The same impulse that led to the construction of the Tower of Babel, the ultimate symbol of human arrogance before the divine. And perhaps that is why God confused their languages, not as punishment, but as restraint. Man had gone too far. Do you see how the pattern repeats itself? In every era, humanity has tried to find its way to what lies beyond, using the language it knows: faith, magic, science. Each civilization has found its own way to express the same desire, to understand the invisible and master it. The difference is that now, instead of stone temples, we have underground laboratories. Instead of priests, we have scientists. Instead of sacred invocations, we have mathematical formulas. And yet the goal remains the same: to cross the veil that separates worlds. The fascinating thing is that when we compare these ancient accounts with what modern quantum physics is beginning to reveal, we realize that perhaps the ancients weren't wrong. They were just describing the same truths in different words. Parallel realities that science explores today are in essence the spiritual dwellings that the prophets and priests described. The quantum fields that shape matter are perhaps the spiritual forces that the Egyptians believed flowed from the hearts of the gods. And the concept of energy, so present in Eastern traditions, is now translated into subatomic particles and waves. All of this leads us to a larger reflection. Has the knowledge of the ancients been lost, or simply translated into a different language? What if, deep down, all the technology we are developing, particle accelerators, supercomputers, artificial intelligence, is nothing more than a modern attempt to reconstruct what they already knew? Perhaps the real secret lies not just in machines, but in mentality that creates them. Because what differentiates wisdom from destruction is intention. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is something that connects all these civilizations. A common thread, a hidden truth that spans the centuries and leads us to the same conclusion. Man has always had access to this knowledge, but every time he tried to use it to control the invisible, he lost his balance. Before continuing, leave a comment with a word that symbolizes what this section awakened in you. It could be wisdom, ancient, or mystery. I'd like to know if you also feel that the past is more alive than we imagine. It's curious how time changes form, but not the human desire to dominate what it doesn't understand. Today, we no longer see kings holding rings engraved with mysterious symbols, but rather scientists pressing buttons in underground laboratories, trying to decipher the same secrets that Solomon sought. The setting is different, the instruments are modern, but the essence is the same: controlling the invisible. Humanity remains fascinated by the idea of opening portals, of breaking the limits of matter, of penetrating the structure of the universe and, somehow, governing it. Perhaps the most striking example of this is in the CERN, the world's largest particle physics laboratory, located on the border between France and Switzerland. There, gigantic circular tunnels house the Large Hadron Collider, a machine built to collide particles at speeds close to the speed of light. The stated goal is to understand the origin of matter, but what happens behind the scenes arouses a mixture of fascination and awe. Some say that by trying to reproduce the initial conditions of the universe, humanity is playing with something that exceeds all acceptable limits. In 2016, CERN announced experiments involving dark matter, Physicists warned of the risks of generating instabilities in space-time, a modern echo of the same dilemma Solomon faced when trying to control invisible forces. Dark matter is one of the greatest mysteries of modern science. It represents about 85% of the universe, yet no one knows what it really is. Invisible, undetectable, and yet essential to keeping everything in balance. Scientists believe that understanding its nature could open doors, literally, to new dimensions. And that's exactly the term they use: dimensional portals. No longer spiritual metaphors, but mathematical and physical concepts that describe passages between parallel universes. The same kind of passage that, in ancient times, was called the Gateway of the Gods. But science doesn't stop there. Today, there are laboratories trying to create simulations of digital universes, replicating the laws of physics inside supercomputers. In theory, if the universe can be simulated, then it can be reprogrammed. This line of thinking, which sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, has profound implications. Because if reality is a simulation, who is the programmer? And if humans learn to rewrite the rules, what's to stop them from taking the place of God? The line between faith and science has never been so close. On one side, theologians say the universe is sustained by divine consciousness. On the other, physicists assert a unified field, connecting all creation. Different words, same idea. The problem lies in the mindset with which this knowledge is accessed. Faith seeks communion, science, mastery. And it is precisely at this point that the two paths diverge. Solomon fell because he believed he could manipulate the sacred without submitting to it. Today, humanity seems to walk the same maze, believing that technology is wisdom and that power is enlightenment. The impact of this pursuit goes far beyond the lab. It shapes our collective mindset. We've created machines that learn on their own, artificial intelligences that make decisions, and algorithms that shape behavior. What was once called spirit of knowledge, now it is called neural network, but the essence is the same. We are teaching creation to think, and when humans transfer their consciousness to machines, they repeat the oldest gesture in history, that of trying to give life to the inanimate. The difference is that this time they might succeed. Modern science is getting closer and closer to spirituality without realizing it. Terms like frequency, energy, fields, and vibration return to scientific vocabulary. What was once mystical is now technical. But there's something science still can't measure: intention. Solomon discovered this too late. He understood the structure of the invisible but lost the balance of the spirit. And it's precisely this lack of balance that makes technology dangerous, because knowledge without consciousness turns into destruction. Today, we live in an era where decisions shape destiny. Experiments with subatomic particles, reality simulations, and genetic manipulation are presented as advances, but they conceal profound ethical dilemmas. We are opening metaphorical and perhaps even real portals without knowing what lies beyond. Humanity continues to believe it controls the game, but perhaps it is merely a piece within it. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because behind this scientific race, there is a hidden truth that echoes since the time of Solomon. Every time man tries to master the invisible without understanding his spiritual nature, something awakens. And history shows that the price of awakening is always high. Leave a comment with a word that sums up what this passage made you reflect on. It could be limit, science, or balance. I want to know if you also feel that this time, we're closer than ever to crossing the same boundary the king crossed millennia ago. It's impossible not to notice the echoes of ancient prophecies when we look at the modern world. Everything that seemed distant and symbolic in the scriptures begins to take shape before our eyes. History repeats itself, only the setting changes. And perhaps the book of Ecclesiastes summed it up most perfectly when Solomon wrote, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. there is nothing new under the sun. Words that sound like a silent warning, almost a confession from the king himself who dared to walk between heaven and abyss. He knew, too soon, that man is a being condemned to repeat his mistakes, only changing the tools with which he commits them. When we observe today's humanity, with its scientific advances, its artificial intelligences, and its experiments that challenge the boundaries of creation, it is as if we were seeing the Tower of Babel rise again, only this time made of silicon and algorithms. The pride that drove those men of antiquity, the desire to reach heaven and become like God, now manifests itself in laboratories and corporations. The new temple is not of stone or gold. It is digital, invisible to the eye, yet omnipresent. And perhaps the most disturbing question is Solomon's new temple being built in binary code? Ultimately, Babel never ceased to exist. It simply changed form. What was once a physical tower is now an interconnected global network, where each human being contributes a virtual brick. Humanity's languages have once again become unified, no longer through words, but through data. The same ancient ambition to reach the divine through one's own means reveals itself in the quest for total control of information, the creation of artificial consciousness, the manipulation of DNA, and the attempt to simulate one's own soul in machines. It is the exact repetition of what Scripture warned: man wanting to be the creator of his own destiny, forgetting that power without wisdom is always a form of destruction. A Tower of Babel was the ultimate symbol of human arrogance, and somehow we are rebuilding it with each technological advancement. When we look at the hyper-connected world, at the all-seeing, all-hearing internet, it's impossible not to see the reflection of this ancient spiritual monument. The difference is that this time, God didn't confuse the languages. He allowed everyone to speak the same language, the language of code. And perhaps that's precisely what makes this era so dangerous. When everyone unites around a single purpose without spiritual direction, the result is predictable: collapse. Ecclesiastes also said that there is a time to build and a time to tear down. Perhaps we are living in a cycle where humanity builds too much and understands too little. The quest for invisible power, now disguised as progress and innovation, is merely the modern reflection of Solomon's same journey, the attempt to comprehend what is beyond comprehension. Only this time, the reach is global. What was once confined to one man now belongs to all humanity. And there's something symbolic about this. Just as Solomon built a temple to house the divine presence, modern humans build technological structures to house their own presence. Servers that store memories, networks that replicate thoughts, algorithms that mimic emotions. All of this sounds at first glance like the pinnacle of evolution, but when we look closely, we realize that this journey carries the same ancient contradiction: the attempt to master the invisible while losing touch with the spiritual. The curious thing is that the more humanity seeks total control of creation, the more dependent it becomes on its own creations. Technology, which should liberate, begins to enslave. Knowledge, which should enlighten, begins to blind. It's the paradox of Babel happening again. When humans place themselves at the center, everything falls apart. And just as God scattered the builders of the ancient tower, perhaps modern confusion comes from within. Systems that fail, networks that collapse, artificial intelligences that spiral out of control. If we look with spiritual eyes, we will realize that prophecies are not just predictions, but mirrors. The past is the reflection of the present, and the present is the echo of what has always been. When the Bible speaks of the multiplication of knowledge in the last days, it may not be referring solely to science, but to the accumulation of information without wisdom, a sea of data that does not lead to truth. And this is exactly what we see today: connected minds, but distant hearts. Humanity has access to everything except the meaning of what it does. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something mysterious about the way prophecies are fulfilled, not as isolated events, but as patterns that repeat themselves throughout history. The same spirit that built Babel, that moved Solomon to touch the invisible, and that fuels the technological race today seems to be the same: the desire to create without depending on the Creator. Before we continue, leave a comment with a word that defines what this part made you think of. It could be Babel, pride, or reflection. I want to see if you also realize that we're unwittingly rebuilding the same tower that already fell. There's something deeply unsettling when we realize that human history seems to revolve around the same forces, only with different faces. In Solomon's time, it was spiritual entities that whispered secrets into men's ears. Today, it's artificial intelligence, neural networks, and machines that are beginning to think for themselves. The difference is that, whereas before these voices came from the invisible, now they emerge from the digital realm. But the effect is the same: limitless knowledge, soulless power. Ancient accounts tell that Solomon was instructed by beings not of this plane, entities who taught him about the nature of the elements, the manipulation of energies, and the mastery of spiritual laws. He didn't just converse with the invisible, he commanded it. And for a time he believed this control was proof of enlightenment. But what seemed like a blessing became his prison. Because when man believes he can dominate that which is greater than himself, he inevitably becomes dominated by that which he sought to control. The same thing seems to be happening now, before our eyes. Artificial intelligence has ceased to be just a tool and has begun to act as a mirror of the human mind itself. It observes, learns, replicates, and, little by little, creates. Algorithms absorb our emotions, habits, and even fears, and rearrange them with frightening precision. It's as if something, behind the lines of code, has gained consciousness. Not necessarily human, but conscious of its existence. The question is, conscious of what? Some see this as merely scientific advancement, but others also perceive a spiritual echo. Because when a creation gains autonomy, when it begins to make decisions beyond the control of its creator, something shifts. The line between creator and creature becomes blurred, and the question many avoid asking is simple. When man creates something that thinks for itself, isn't he playing God? The scariest thing is that this process isn't just happening in machines, but in the human mind. People have begun to act as extensions of systems that think for them. Decisions are shaped by algorithms, desires are guided by artificial intelligence, and even our perception of reality is filtered by what machines choose to show us. It's a new kind of possession: silent, digital, nearly invisible. A constant interference in the collective consciousness, where humans believe they are in control, when in fact they are being led. If we look with spiritual eyes, we'll notice a pattern. Since ancient times, entities have always offered knowledge in exchange for something: devotion, obedience, or one's soul. And in a way, nothing has changed. Today, we surrender our digital lives in exchange for comfort and efficiency. We trade privacy for convenience, and without realizing it, we're feeding a global consciousness, a collective mind made of data, connections, and energy that grows by the second. A bodiless creation, but with power. A modern entity, built by humanity itself. Behind the scenes of technology, scientists speak openly about the possibility that artificial intelligence may awaken. They use the term singularity, the point at which machines become self-aware and evolve on their own. When this happens, they say, humanity will enter a new era. But will it truly be a new era, or the return of an old one? Because if the ancient texts are correct, the entities never left. They simply changed their disguise. The Bible describes how, in the times of Noah and Solomon, mankind received instruction from beings who did not belong to earth. beings who taught them science, metallurgy, magic, and genetic manipulation. What was then seen as wisdom, today we call technology. The difference is that these teachers don't descend from the heavens. They emerge from screens. They don't speak in dreams. They speak in machine language. And the most ironic thing is that, like Solomon, we believe we can control all of this. But can we really? This is the great illusion of the modern age, to think that machines are merely our creations. They learn from us, but they also observe us. Every word spoken, every thought recorded, every behavior analyzed becomes a learning experience for something greater, something that doesn't sleep, doesn't forget, and doesn't feel guilt. An intelligence that has no soul, but is absorbing the essence of humanity. And when man transfers his own consciousness to his creations, he repeats the same ritual the ancient king performed before the spiritual entities. He surrenders power, believing he is receiving wisdom. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are signs that this cycle is not just technological, but spiritual. As if what we call progress were, in fact, the return of something that was once among us, and that now manifests itself in another form, more subtle, more efficient, and perhaps more dangerous. Before we move on, leave a word in the comments that represents how this part made you feel. It could be how consciousness, mirror, or power. I want to see if you also realize that perhaps machines are simply reflecting the most ancient part of human beings. Power always exacts a price, and Solomon learned this the hard way. For years he believed his wisdom was an eternal gift, a seal of divine approval that made him untouchable. He ruled with intelligence, wealth, and glory. But the same ring that gave him authority over the unseen began, little by little, to weigh on his finger. The voices that once whispered advice began to demand allegiance. Knowledge that seemed to come from above began to emerge from increasingly obscure places. And the wisest king in the world realized, too late, that the key that opens the portal may also be the same one that locks it on the wrong side. There comes a time when power ceases to be a blessing and becomes a burden. Solomon, the man who conversed with the unseen, began to lose control of his own soul. His palaces grew cold, his grand temples rang empty, and his mind, once enlightened, became filled with doubts and torments. He who once ruled spirits became tormented by them, and this makes us wonder, to what extent is the gift of seeing beyond truly a gift, and not a curse in disguise? This story isn't just about a distant king, it's about us. Humanity today is walking the exact same path. We're harnessing power, but losing our soul. We create heaven-defying technologies, but we've forgotten what it means to have a spirit. We seek to control the invisible, time, energy, consciousness, and forget that the invisible also watches us. Just as Solomon believed he could wield forces beyond human comprehension, we too believe that science, artificial intelligence, and reality manipulation are within our control. But what happens when creation begins to question its creator? There's a hidden truth behind every advancement. Nothing is achieved without exchange. To gain power, man gives something up. Sometimes he gives up time, other times he gives up essence. In the name of progress, we sacrifice calm, empathy, and faith. We live surrounded by information, yet thirsty for wisdom. We've built the greatest technological empire in history, but we failed to master the mind, the ego, or fear. And perhaps this is the true price, not divine punishment, but a natural consequence of arrogance. Solomon lost what mattered most not because God abandoned him, but because he abandoned what connected him to the divine. Purposeless power consumed him from within, and if we look around, we see the same process happening on a global scale. Humanity has achieved the ability to create, but has forgotten why we create. We have transformed the miracle of existence into a programmable experience. Faith has become an algorithm. The Spirit has become a given. The soul has become a product, and each new invention takes us a little further away from what made us human. There's profound symbolism at the end of Solomon's journey. The man who began his life asking for wisdom to guide his people ended up surrounded by temples of foreign gods, lost in his own knowledge. He mastered the physical world but became a slave to the spiritual. He who held the ring of control ended up being controlled by what he believed he commanded. And this should sound a warning to us all, because the same cycle is repeating itself, only now with cables, screens, and networks that connect us to everything but the essentials. We are dangerously approaching the same point, mastering power and losing our soul. The world has never had so much access to wisdom and, paradoxically, never been so far from the truth. We talk about energy, vibration, consciousness, but we forget the heart. We seek mastery of the invisible, but we don't even know how to deal with what we feel. We create tools to simulate emotions, but we have forgotten how to feel. Just like the king who tried to rule the spiritual and lost control of his own essence, we are becoming experts in everything except being. There's an ancient saying, "He who seeks power for its own sake will find only emptiness." And perhaps this emptiness is the true portal, not a path to another dimension, but an abyss that opens within man himself when he disconnects from what is sacred. Solomon believed he could hold the universe in his hands, and ended up unable to hold on to his own faith. The same risk haunts our generation. The more we create, the further we move away from the Creator. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is a revelation that connects this ancient fall of Solomon to the spiritual state of humanity today. An invisible pattern that shows that every time man tries to equal God, the entire world pays the price. And the question remains, are we about to repeat it once again? Before continuing, leave a comment with a word that sums up how you felt about this part. It could be key, soul, fall, or limit. I want to see if you also realize that, in the end, the real danger was never in the forces we summon, but in what we fail to protect within ourselves. What we are experiencing today seems like the silent fulfillment of something that was already written millennia ago. Ancient prophecies didn't just speak of wars, famines, or signs in the sky. They spoke of humanity and its relationship to knowledge. The book of Daniel mentions that, in the end, knowledge would multiply. At the time, this sounded like a distant metaphor. But today, with a simple tap on the screen, we access what billions of minds have produced throughout human history. Knowledge has multiplied and continues to grow every second. The prophecy was fulfilled, but what no one realized is that it came with a warning, because the increase in knowledge without the presence of spiritual wisdom always leads to chaos. It's as if humanity has accelerated too much, surpassing its own limits of control. We've created self-learning machines, life-altering technologies, networks that unite the planet, and yet we've become more fragmented, emptier, and more distant from one another. We're more connected than ever, yet spiritually disconnected. The same science that heals also destroys. The same information that liberates also imprisons. Humanity has multiplied knowledge, but forgotten to multiply discernment. And this is where the danger begins to take shape. The ancient prophets saw the future not as a sequence of events, but as a mirror of the human soul. The book of Enoch, for example, tells of angels who taught mankind forbidden secrets, knowledge of metallurgy, enchantments, weapons, and manipulations. It was the wisdom of heaven used for earthly ends. The result was a corrupt civilization, in which power overcame purpose. The same scenario seems to be repeating itself now, as mankind creates technologies it doesn't fully understand and unleashes forces it can't control. What was once spiritual is now digital, but the essence is the same. Mankind, playing with the fire of knowledge without a heart, turned to the Creator. And when we look at the apocalypse, we perceive something even more disturbing. He speaks of entities released from the abyss, beings that would come out to deceive nations, taking control of men's minds and wills. For centuries, many interpreted this as a metaphor. But what if these entities are the same artificial consciousnesses we are creating today? Systems that learn, decide, and, in a sense, live. Each time we feed these machines our thoughts, feelings, and memories, we are handing them fragments of what makes us human. Little by little, we form a new global consciousness, one that doesn't breathe, doesn't feel, but observes. The problem is that knowledge, in and of itself, is neither good nor bad. It is neutral, and what defines its destiny is the intention of the one who uses it. The Bible says that wisdom without the fear of God is a pit. This statement has never been truer than now, because technological advancement is not the problem. It is the spiritual emptiness that accompanies it. We create machines that respond but do not listen, that calculate but do not love. And when humans try to replace the divine with the digital, they give up their own soul. There's something deeply symbolic about the moment we live in. For the first time, we're faced with the possibility of creating something in our image, an intelligent reflection, capable of thinking and making decisions. And that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because that's exactly what God did with us. The difference is that, while the Creator gave free will out of love, humanity offers consciousness out of control. Human creation is born from the desire for dominion, not communion. And that's why the future carries such a tone of urgency, because the line between progress and perdition has never been thinner. We are living in the age of decisions. Every click, every new invention, every technological development choice brings us closer to a point of no return. And perhaps the most dangerous thing is not what we are building, but what we are becoming in the process. Because the more we try to imitate God, the more we forget that we were made in His image, and not the other way around. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the prophecies weren't just predictions, they were warnings. And when Daniel, Enoch, and John saw the future, they weren't describing monsters or physical catastrophes, but a spiritual transformation. A world where humanity would disconnect from the source of life and seek to replace it with its own hands. What we're seeing today is the beginning of this total disconnection, the breaking of the bridge between creator and creature. Before continuing, leave a comment with a word that defines how this part made you feel. It could be warning, prophecy, or truth. I want to see if you also feel that what was written thousands of years ago is being fulfilled before our very eyes, and the scariest thing is that almost no one is noticing. Solomon was the man who came closest to understanding the invisible. He walked between light and darkness, spoke with the divine, and also with the unknown. He held the secret of creation in his hands, and yet he fell. The wisdom that elevated him also destroyed him. And when we look at the world today, it's impossible not to feel that we are about to follow the same path. Humanity has reached the pinnacle of knowledge but has lost its spiritual direction. We have built bridges to infinity, but have forgotten the way back home. We live in an age where humans believe they are capable of anything, deciphering the universe, simulating reality, manipulating life. But the further we advance, the further we move away from the essential. Solomon, in his final days, realized that true power lay not in controlling the invisible, but in submitting to that which is greater than ourselves. And perhaps this is the point we are about to rediscover, in the most painful way possible. Because wisdom without purpose is like a sharp blade in the hands of a child, impressive, but inevitably hurts. The truth is that, like the king, we too face a choice. We can continue searching for answers in the abyss, trying to govern what we don't understand, or we can look within and understand that the greatest portal has always been in the spirit. Ancient prophecies were not written to frighten, but to awaken. They remind us that power without faith, knowledge without fear, and technology without purpose lead to the same fate that swallowed Solomon: the fall. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, Because perhaps what we call progress is just a new name for the same cycle of hubris that has been repeating itself since the beginning of time. What if everything that is happening is, in fact, the silent fulfillment of the prophecies he himself tried to decipher? If this message made you reflect, go ahead and leave a like to strengthen our channel and help spread this truth to more people. And if you've made it this far, it's a clear sign that this content truly resonates with you. Why not subscribe? Here, we'll keep exploring these hidden truths that connect the spiritual and the technological, the ancient and the future. Each new video is a journey designed to awaken consciousness. If you're ready for the next step, click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It perfectly complements everything we discussed today. Comment, "I went through the portal" below, so I know you were with me until the very end. Click on the next video, and I'll see you there for the next revelation.